Pilate therefore said to him, "Are you a king then?" And Jesus answered him, "You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" Welcome to What is Truth. I'm Payton. Welcome to What is Truth, or WIT, as they may be calling it. That's short for What is Truth, and we'll be getting into what exactly that is. I am the host, Payton Arnett. Just to give you a little bit of background about me, I am right now a college student, and my passion is in Christian apologetics. This is a show that will primarily be focused on philosophy, theology, Christian apologetics, why we believe what we believe as Christians, and hopefully a show that can also equally be appealing to unbelievers. I have always been a Christian. I've been raised my whole life as a Christian, but that does not mean that that's why I'm a Christian. As cold case homicide detective J. Warner Wallace says, I'm not a Christian because I was raised that way or because it satisfies some need or accomplishes some goal. I'm simply a Christian because it's evidentially true. That's kind of what I consider for myself as well. Now, he wasn't raised a Christian, I was. I was baptized into the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I just figure I'll throw that out there. When I was in about 7th grade, I believe, and that was a little while ago now, and though I always believed God existed, I always believed Jesus died for my sins, I grew up in private Christian school, that does not mean that it was always real to me personally. Something that I've noticed in our spiritual walks is that we can go for a long time being what Jesus might refer to as lukewarm. Or we know what we believe, we don't really know why we believe it, we are just kind of raised that way. What I found is, when you live that way and then you're confronted with a challenge, you often stumble. Because if you don't have firm foundation in what you believe, you don't know why you believe it, and when someone asks you a question like, if God, why evil, which we'll get into in this episode, you don't really know what to say. 1 Peter 3:15 calls us to always be prepared to give an answer for the hope that we have in Jesus. That is why apologetics matters. And you might be wondering, what is apologetics? I don't know exactly who will be watching this. Some of you may be watching this because you already know apologetics. Some may be watching this just because I told you to watch it or something like that. But apologetics comes from the Greek word apologia, which means to defend. Now, some actually have a problem with Christian apologetics. They say that Christian apologetics is not a good idea because the Christian faith is inherently something that is built on faith. But when they say faith, they mean blind faith. I don't believe that we as Christians are called to have blind faith. That is one of the missions of this show. I really don't think we're called to have blind faith, and I think that that's biblical. When the Bible talks about faith, it means trust based on something, not trust based in lack of something, or in lack of evidence. There are many examples of Jesus being an evidentialist. His apostles were evidentialists. Just to throw out a few of them, for example, when the apostle Paul is confronted with Christ on the road to Damascus, his evidence on what he's seen and what he's heard convinces him to convert and to leave everything else behind and become a Christian, even though he had just been persecuting the Christian church. In the same way, Jesus was an evidentialist, because he told people to believe in him based on the signs he was performing. Not based off faith, not based off blind faith, but based off the signs he was performing. So this show, its primary focus is to get a conversation going about the topic of truth. We are to pursue truth. The topic of truth is complicated in our culture today. It's not really very simple. There was a time when the word truth just simply meant what is the objective nature of the reality that we're in. Now it seems that truth is more complicated. Religion has been attacked for a long time. But in our world today, it's being attacked in a different way, in a way that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And that's the reason for shows like this. And this is certainly not the only show like this. I think that I have a unique format going here, but when it comes down to it, there are many other podcast shows that I can point you to, and I will point you to through the course of this show, about resources of understanding why you believe what you believe. Because the culture will tell you that you can have your truth and I can have my truth. The problem with this concept is, how do we know who's right? And there has to be a right and wrong. For example, we all agree that Adolf Hitler was wrong to do what he did in the Holocaust. But why was he wrong? Because under the worldview of the culture today, Adolf Hitler was not wrong. It was just his truth. It was just what he believed. He believed he was doing what was right, and he followed his heart. we obviously all know there's something wrong with that. Something not right about Adolf Hitler following his heart. So, should we follow our hearts? Well, the Bible says the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked above all things. Who could know it? So that leaves us in a tough spot because we as believers, we don't want to be the odd ones out, but at the same time, we're called to be not of this world. There are so many layers to what truth is in the world today. And in the next segment, we're going to get into the idea of truth and the story that this comes from. This show is based on John 18, and we'll read that in the next segment. But we're going to shorten that because saying what is truth every time could be a little exhausting. Instead, we're lazy in the culture today, right? So we're just going to say it's wit because we're to have wit when we're confronting challenges to the Christian faith. Do you know that the Bible actually says we ought to demolish arguments against the faith? I'll put that on the screen here. So we're going to be having wit in our defense of the Christian faith. There are many people I can point you to who have that wit. Frank Turek is one of them. And by the way, if you're watching this and you're interested in denominational conversation, that will happen on this show. However, I do believe that there are issues that are in-house. And I will point you to somebody like Frank Turek or J. Warner Wallace, who is not a Seventh-day Adventist like myself. That does not mean that their material is incorrect. Yeah, I disagree with some of the things they said. And if you look at my personal YouTube channel, you can find a video of me asking Frank Turek about questions in regards to different denominations of Christianity. That does not mean that his material is not valid. The book I'm currently reading is I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Frank Turek. There are certainly great apologists out there in many different denominations of Christianity. Unfortunately, I think that Adventism may be lacking in this area, which is something hopefully we can bring to the table with this show. Another thing wonderful we're going to do on this show, not in this episode, but in future episodes, is we will have guests on this show where I will interview them and ask conversations. Right now, I'm the one talking. In the future, it'll be guests talking, at least probably one segment for a lot of episodes. Another thing about this show, it'll be weekly. Weekly content is a good way to do it. I find that I listen to weekly podcasts often as an Adventist on Sabbath because it's a great way to keep up with something once a week. The episodes will release once a week, and there will be about 3 segments to the show. This show, for example, will consist of this introduction segment with me talking. A second segment usually or could be an interview. This time, it will simply be me diving into John 18 with you and kind of going through where the title came from of the show. And finally, the final segment will consist of questions, common questions about the Christian faith. And there will certainly be opportunities to interact, and I will be answering any questions that I can that are submitted. You can follow this account on social media. You can also follow my personal media as well. They will be linked in the YouTube. This will be on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. And there will be many opportunities to interact and to ask that question, what is truth, along with me in this show. This show is certainly not about me. This show is about higher things, bigger things than you or I. This show is about pursuing truth. This show is about finding truth. And to give you personal take, of course, my personal belief is that truth is not an idea, it's a person. And that person is Jesus Christ. And I believe that in order to get to know Jesus Christ, you must first know Jesus of Nazareth. That is my pinned tweet on Twitter, literally. And the reason that is because in order to get to know Jesus Christ, you got to know Jesus of Nazareth. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that we ought to study the historical Jesus in order to get to know our personal Jesus. It's different for each and every one of us. It's not as simple as just saying everybody's got to study history and philosophy to be a Christian. I don't think that's true at all. What I do think, and I will say this is a universal claim, we all ought to know what we believe and why we believe it. Friends, there's going to be times in the world today. I'm on a college campus right now. There's certainly going to be times when you're confronted with challenges to your faith. People will ask you questions like, if God, why evil? They'll ask you, what is truth? Just like Pontius Pilate asked Jesus. And we ought to know how to defend what we believe and why we believe it. The reason I'm a Christian is because I think it's evidentially true. The reason I'm a Christian is because I have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. But let me tell you, my personal relationship with Jesus Christ didn't get to where it is today until I looked into the evidence for Christianity. There's no doubt in my mind that Jesus Christ rose from the dead 2,000 years ago. And that is why this show exists, to pursue and answer those questions we may have about Jesus Christ. I'll end on this in this segment. C.S. Lewis said, Christianity, if false, is of no importance. But if it's true, it's of infinite importance. The only thing it cannot be is moderately important. It's either everything is or it's nothing. I'll see you in the next segment, which will be diving into John 18, which is where the title of the show comes from. Welcome back to What is Truth, or WIT as we're calling it. We're going to dive right into the namesake of this show. We're going to go right into the Gospel of John, which is, I don't want to say my favorite gospel, but I certainly love reading the Gospel of John because John has such a divine focus in the Gospel of John. Now, one of the things I want to say before we dive into Scripture is there are two ways to read Scripture. You can read it from the perspective of somebody who is worshiping or in spiritual meditate. I don't know. I don't like the word meditation very much, but there's that way to read it in the already you're a Christian worship sense. Great. You can also read it as a historical document, and I think that if we're studying together, maybe we read it as a historical account while knowing full well that we have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. So we're diving into John chapter 18 today because that's where the namesake of this show comes from. And in the namesake, well, John chapter 18, verse 33. Now, if you want to join me there in your Bible, feel free to. Unless you're driving, I shouldn't have to say that, but I feel the need to say don't read while you're driving. I really don't have to say that, do I? People do crazy stuff. Don't read while you're driving. Anyway, in John chapter 18, verses 33, we start reading and we find that Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus, and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Because this is the accusation that was coming against Jesus. And Jesus answered him, "Are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you this concerning me?" Jesus was interestingly seeking Pilate's honest question. Was this an honest question from Pilate? Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and your chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." By the way, a side note, notice how Jesus actually carries a dialogue with Pilate. If you read backwards in the gospel accounts, you find that Jesus often kind of just stayed silent when put on trial. Often he didn't answer the questions, but obviously there was something about Pilate that Jesus felt he actually could answer his questions. And Pilate therefore said to him, "Are you a king then?" Pilate's earnestly asking, what is this guy's motive? Why is he here before me? And Jesus answered him, "You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said, "I find no fault in him." So, the question Pilate asks is a question our culture asks today. And that's why this show is titled that. That's why we're at where we're at. Because Pilate asked an earnest question. Now, it doesn't seem that Pilate actually took careful need to listen to what Jesus had to say in response. Pilate seems to have just... He didn't really want to know the answer, I don't think. If he had, he may have not put Jesus to death. Now, we know that he washed his hand clean of it, but he still allowed it to happen. When the culture asks the question, what is truth? And when Pilate asks the question, what is truth? We have to understand what the word truth means, and what are we seeking for? Why are we asking the question? Why does truth matter? Well, truth matters because everything revolves around that. We may not realize this, but everything revolves around what's true, what's actually correct. And some may say that it's your truth or my truth. You hear that all the time in the culture today. Well, to use an example that Frank Turek uses, if your truth and my truth are the only two types of truth, there is no the truth. I challenge you this. Go to your bank and say, "Give me $10,000 out of the account." Well, the guy at the bank is probably going to tell you, "No, I can't do that. All you got is $5 in there." Well, and then just tell him, "Oh, that's true for you and not for me. Give me the 10 grand. Is that going to work? Of course it's not going to work. Because it's objectively true for everybody that all you got is $5 in the bank. I know most of you hopefully don't have $5 in the bank. It's just an extreme example. The point is that even things that we view as subjective are still objective. For example, let's say that you like chocolate cake and I like vanilla cake. Well, that's true for everybody. You may say, well, that's not true for everybody. It is true for every human being to ever live on this earth that you like chocolate and I like vanilla. It's not true that every human being likes chocolate or every human being likes vanilla, but it's objectively true that I feel that way and you feel that way. There's always an objective truth in every claim that we make. When we say things every day, we're making truth claims. Everything we say is a truth claim, including all the claims that I just made. So when someone says there is no truth, you ask them, is that true? You flip it back on them. Because a lot of the things people say in these days are not exactly, let's say they're not cohesive. They don't make sense, right? We ought to do this in love. But we do need to combat the culture. We do need to ask questions. Asking questions is the most important thing, even if they're stupid questions. Jordan Peterson once said, if you ask enough stupid questions, then you're not stupid anymore. If we ask questions, we learn more. And it's okay to ask a question you may think is silly. I'm not claiming to have all the answers. That's certainly not true. When it comes to the pursuit of truth, I think we have to have the mindset of Socrates. For those of you who don't know the story of Socrates, Socrates was a man who was told he was the wisest in the land. A friend of his went to an oracle, and he asked the oracle, who's the wisest in the land? Socrates' friend got the response, well, Socrates is. So Socrates' friend goes back to him. And when Socrates finds out that that was the answer, he's shocked. He can't believe it. He says, there's no way that I'm the wisest in the land. The only thing I know is that I know nothing. So Socrates goes and he interviews a bunch of people, and he says, tell me what you can. He goes to a medical doctor. Tell me what you can about medicine. Well, the doctor goes on and on and on and explains everything about medicine. But the doctor's not necessarily right about everything. And what Socrates came to realize is, the doctor knows nothing, but he claims to know everything. The only difference between me and the doctor is that I know nothing. And he realized that's why he's considered the wisest. Now, just to be clear, as this point has been made to me before, we're not literally claiming we know absolutely nothing. I think I do have knowledge. I think I know things, and I think you know things too. We all know that 2 + 2 = 4. We don't literally know nothing, but we don't know everything. And I think that's the point of Socrates' story. Now, I do think Socrates was a real guy, but the story has applications for us today too. We are called to fully acknowledge that we don't know everything. The scripture is very clear that we are imperfect beings. We don't know everything, but that doesn't mean we know absolutely nothing. I think we can say beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. I think we can know that beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt. So where does that leave us? When we ask the question, what is truth? We're really seeking objective truth. We're looking for objective truth claims. So in this show, we're not going to spend time digging into subjective claims about reality that really have no bearing on anything. We're going to dig into actual objective truths about the world, and we're going to find out what actually is true. That doesn't mean we're going to be right all the time. Call me out if I'm wrong. And I'll also call a commenter out if I think the commenter is incorrect. That doesn't mean that we're always going to be right. But we certainly shouldn't stop trying because of that. When Pilate asked the question, what is truth? I think there was a part of him that had earnesty, that really wanted to know. But he didn't have the strength to stop Jesus from being persecuted. He didn't stop him from being put on the cross. When we ask the question, what is truth? We're going to get pushed back. We're going to have people not like what we have to say. That's the reality of the situation. Does that affect whether we do it in love? Not at all. A mentor of mine once told me we're called to show unconditional divine love. Unconditional divine love. When we ask the question, what is truth? What is most important is that we stay true to being loving people. Jesus Christ is truth, but Jesus Christ is also love. So we can't seek truth without love, and we can't seek love without truth. Someone once said, if you love someone, you tell them what they need to hear. If you love yourself, you tell them what they want to hear. That's not easy, but that is the reality of the situation. So when Pilate asked the question, what is truth? I think he was seeking earnestly, and I call for us to do the same. Let's seek the truth in love, and that is what the point of this show is. So I hope that you'll continue to listen to What is Truth, and in the next segment, we're going to take a look at some questions that are commonly asked about Christianity, including the question of what is truth in more depth. So first of all, we already kind of answered the question of what is truth in the last segment, but I think we can talk a little bit more about that. And the question of what is truth is actually kind of simple because we're asking what's objectively true about the world. We're not asking every in and out. We're asking what's objectively true about the world. When we ask the question, what is truth, we're seeking answers through philosophy and religion. It will lead us to religion. Religion is something that is unavoidable. Religion's also done a lot of damage. The question of what is truth will lead us to a religion because it's making a claim that can't be proven by science. What you might hear in the world today is, "Oh, I only trust scientific truths," or "Only truth can only be found through science." Is something you'll hear in the world today. There's a good question you can ask back to them when someone says that. If somebody says to you, "Truth can only be found through science," your response should be, "Is that a scientific truth? Can you prove that in a laboratory?" You can't. We're seeking truth beyond science. That doesn't mean we're never going to look at science, because there's books like Lee Strobel's A Case for a Creator, which is a fantastic book when it comes to the evidence through science of a creator of the universe. That's not the only place you can find truth. Truth can be found through philosophy. It can be found through religion. Of course, we have to ask the question, which religion's true? Which religion is true? We're talking about truth. Well, the three world religions, if we want to take a look at those, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are the three places you can go. Well, you have to look at the core tenets of the faith and say which one most accurately supports the world as we see it. Judaism is frankly just Christianity, but incomplete. You're missing Jesus, because Judaism isn't false except for the fact that it now claims that Jesus is not the Messiah. If Jesus is known to be the Messiah, then Judaism is just simply complete. And Islam, notice how Islam can't get rid of Jesus. Jesus exists in Islam, but he's not the Messiah, because every world religion has to deal with Jesus. So that leads us to think, maybe Jesus is the truth. Maybe Jesus has some tie to this truth, because we can't get rid of this guy. He has existed for all of human history. You can't get rid of him. He's always there, everywhere. There's a book called written by J.1 Robles called "Person of Interest" that dissects the impact Jesus made on the culture today, in the world today, not just today, but through all of human history. You can reconstruct the entire gospel accounts, or you can construct the gospel story in general from paintings from the first century or two after Christ. That's impressive. That's notable. This guy was 33 years old when he died. He was a carpenter. He was an itinerant preacher. He wandered around. He was homeless, for crying out loud. And this guy had more impact on the world than any other human being to ever live. And I think that's pretty indisputable. So when we seek truth, I think one of the first places we should look is Jesus of Nazareth. But when I thought of questions that were commonly asked, and feel free to submit questions in the comments, on Instagram, DM, there's 1,000 different ways to get a hold of me through the show or my personal social media. I love questions. Questions are what lead us closer to truth. The biggest question that I figured that we should just try to answer is a big one, all right, and it's not a simple question to answer, but I think that you can actually sum it up relatively quickly, and that is the problem of evil. Many people will say to you, and I'm saying this to people who may be young apologists, upcoming apologists, the problem of evil is not going anywhere. You're going to be confronted with the problem of evil. The question is, how do you deal with that? Well, there's a lot of different ways to deal with it. I think one of the best ones is to turn the question back on the person asking. This is a moral question. Let's make that very clear. This is a moral question. The problem of evil is asking, if God, why evil? You're accusing God of being immoral. This question does not actually provide any evidence that Jesus or God don't exist. Get that very clear. This is what they'll try to tell you. In the culture today, you'll hear a lot that evil kind of disproves God. If there is a God, why does he allow all this evil to happen? Valid question. I'll give you that. It's a valid question. But it does not disprove God. If I don't like mosquitoes, does that prove that they don't exist? Or if I benefit from gravity, does that prove that gravity does exist? No. What I want and what I gain from the world has no impact on truth. And the show, again, is what is truth. There's no impact on truth at all. So the problem of evil is a question that must be dealt with from the perspective that it is a moral question. When someone asks a moral question, you ought to go back to what C.S. Lewis said about morality. To give you a little background in case you don't know C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis, obviously, he wrote Chronicles of Narnia, so a lot of us know C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, but he also wrote other books. C.S. Lewis was, I think, the most important Christian apologist, most influential Christian apologist of the past 200 years. And C.S. Lewis said this. He said, the reason I wasn't a Christian, I'm paraphrasing because I can't remember the exact quote. The reason I wasn't a Christian was because the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But where did I get this idea of just and unjust? One does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea what the straight line looks like. To what was I comparing the universe when I called it just and unjust? This is how you turn the argument around. If someone's claiming that God is immoral, some people may call God a moral monster for what he did to the Canaanites in the Old Testament. Which, by the way, if you're calling God a moral monster for what he did in the Old Testament, that means you must believe the Old Testament is accurately recorded history. Catch 20. I don't know if that's the correct usage. Catch 22. That doesn't make any sense. If you're using the Old Testament to disprove God's existence, well, if the Old Testament's true, then God exists because God is a central figure in the Old Testament. If God, let's take, for example, let's say that God really did do the worst things he's accused of doing in the Old Testament. Let's say that God ordered the Israelites to murder men, women, and children, wipe out entire populations, which is up for debate how literal those scriptures need to be taken, whether the Israelites really did just wipe out populations of women and children. It's entirely possible that that's the case, but as William Lane Craig points out, let's say that that's the worst case scenario. Does that disprove that God exists? It does not. It doesn't at all. Because if I do something evil, does that prove that I don't exist? No. But more importantly than that, how can God be evil? Because where do you get this idea of good and evil without God, like C.S. Lewis said? If we need the straight line to tell us what good and evil are, then we certainly need God to tell us what good and evil are, because God is what we mean when we say the straight line. If that's the case, then we can no longer accuse God of being immoral. We can't call God unjust, because he's the very standard of justice, which means whatever he does must be just. Someone may say God should be able to do anything. And a lot of Christians, including me, I've had a problem with this. Can God make a stone so heavy he can't lift it? Can God make a square circle? Well, the answer is no. In the same way that God can't sin. God has a nature. According to what a Christian believes, God has a nature of truth, justice, perfection, power. He can't break his own rules, though, because he's the very standard of those rules. So God cannot do something evil. If God does something, it's just. And someone may accuse God of being a murderer for killing the Canaanites. God can't murder. If God created you, he can't murder you. God can take you out of this life whenever he wants. These are hard truths. These are not easy things to swallow, but it is the reality. God has an absolute right to do what he wants with his creation. But can I tell you something? According to that book, if the Bible's true, he will do whatever's best for you. We may not be able to see it. There's this thing called the butterfly effect that says that we can't see the whole picture, but maybe somebody stepping on a butterfly today ripples forward to cause a great evangelist to rise up 50 years from now. We just don't know. So when we accuse God of being unjust, we're using a standard of God. We're using a standard from God to argue against him. There's actually a book written by Frank Turek, who I had the pleasure of getting to meet a year ago or so. It's called Stealing from God, Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case. And the point is exactly that. Atheists will often use moral arguments to argue against God. How can you use a moral argument to argue against God if God is the standard of morality? And if God isn't the standard of morality, what is? And if it's you, if you're your own standard of morality, who says Hitler's wrong? There's a chapter in Frank Turek's other book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, called Mother Teresa versus Hitler. We all agree that Mother Teresa lived a better life than Hitler. But how do we know that? We don't know that if there is no God. Friends, there are so many good arguments for Christianity, and we've just hit the surface. Remember, always speak the truth in love. Search the truth in love. And live out the truth in love. We're called to show unconditional divine love, as my mentor once told me. But we also are called to seek the truth. Seek the truth above all else. And I truly believe that will lead you to Jesus Christ. That's the end of our Q&A today, and that is the end of What is Truth, Episode 1 for today. I'd like to thank some of the people who have made this show possible. For one, I'd like to thank my Faith Talk co-host, Oliver Robles, for designing the amazing logo we have going for What is Truth. I'd like to thank S4M on music platforms for making the theme song for this show. Good friend of mine as well. He's also our producer over at Faith Talk. You can check out Faith Talk in our links as well, because Faith Talk is a interview style podcast we do once a month where we interview different people to have conversations about truth. This show is primarily aimed at commentary and interviews and questions and answers in regards to truth. Seek truth. Remember, above all else, to show unconditional divine love, to seek truth, and I truly believe that will lead you to Christ. God bless. Have a great day. We'll see you here next time.